This video's fun fact is, holding your breath is an effective way to cure hiccups because the buildup of carbon dioxide in your lungs prevents the diaphragm from contracting. The more you know. Now, right around the corner, coming out in December, is going to be the PS1 Classic. It's supposed to be Sony's attempt at combating the NES Classic and the SNES Classic. It's pretty much a plug-and-play system that you plug into your TV with about 15 or so built-in games in the PS1 Classic, and it's supposed to allow you to play all these retro games that maybe you grew up with, and it's supposed to hit your nostalgia bone pretty hard. The thing with the PS1 Classic is, first of all, it's $100, and we pretty much already know that there's a bunch of problems with the PS1 Classic. Like, for instance, some of the problems the PS1 Classic already has is the fact the UI is not that great on the PS1 Classic. If you look at the UI for the PS1 Classic, it pretty much looks like Sony just got lazy with the PS1 Classic. What they did here is they pretty much just had a static screen with box art. It just doesn't look all that good. Honestly, if you ask me, it looks like some dude coming out of high school or some dude getting out of college made that thing. I'm pretty sure someone could make a much better UI for the system. On top of that, there's only one save state per game, which isn't all that big a deal, but it's kind of unfortunate considering when you look at what Nintendo did with the NES Classic and the SNES Classic. Nintendo really did a fantastic job with the UI design, having more game save states. Overall, they're just much more better quality than what Sony's doing. And on top of that, one of the biggest problems with the PS1 Classic is we're missing a whole bunch of games on the PS1 Classic that should have been there. They're kind of like a no-brainer. How come we don't have staples like Crash or Spyro on there? Because everyone who played a PS1 pretty much played those. And you have to realize something as well. Crash Bandicoot is pretty much the unofficial mascot for Sony back in the 90s. If you know anything about the 90s, you may remember there was a whole bunch of commercials back in the 90s regarding Crash Bandicoot. It was pretty much Sony's answer to Mario and Sonic, and they really wanted to have a mascot, and that was pretty much their mascot. It's kind of like saying we have an NES Classic and an SNES Classic, but let's not throw Mario on there. Mario is irrelevant to the Nintendo brand, so let's not put Mario on the Nintendo Classic console. It just doesn't make any sense. Why would Sony leave out things like that? There's a number of reasons why they would want to leave that out. Maybe because licensing may cost too much, or maybe they have the collections already out. They have Crash and Spyro collections, and maybe they want to generate more sales for that. So maybe that's the reason. We don't really know why they didn't put those games on there, but they didn't put those games on there. And there's also other games on the PS1 Classic that they did not put on the PS1 Classic, which is absolutely ridiculous, and they should have been there. Overall, I think for most people, this thing is a little bit disappointing when it comes to the actual games on there. Yes, there are some good games, don't get me wrong. We have Metal Gear. We also have Resident Evil Director's Cut on there. We have Twisted Metal. We have Rayman. We do have some games on there, but overall, I think most people were kind of disappointed with the lineup when it comes to the PS1 Classic. And on top of that, people are reporting that some of these games on the PS1 Classic kind of are laggy. And you may be thinking to yourself, why are these games laggy? Isn't the reason why these games are laggy is because they're being played on a modern day TV, an HD TV, and these games were meant to be played on a CRT TV? That is quietly true, but if you think about it, how come when you play PS1 games on like a PS3 via backwards compatibility, you really don't have any issues there? So why is that the case when you play certain retro games on different hardware out there? There's no really lag or no really stutters. Yes, don't get me wrong, you're probably going to get some type of lag no matter what, just because these games were meant to be played on an HD TV and they were meant to be played on a CRTV, so that is part of the problem. But I think Sony is actually hiding something here. They don't want to, they're trying to cover up something here, and they don't really want to tell us the truth. Well, it looks like we do have a bit more information on why some of the games on the PS1 Classic just don't run all that well. The reason here is the reason. The reason that some of the games on the PS1 Classic just don't run all that well is because, unfortunately, it looks like what Sony has done. They've actually taken some games that aren't specific to the North American region. They actually took them from PAL and they actually plopped them on the PS1 Classic. And you may be saying to yourself, that's not really a big deal. Who cares what region these games are? As long as they're the exact same game and I'm actually playing them on the PS1 Classic, it doesn't matter if they're from a different region. Well, it kind of does matter what region the games are, at least in terms of the PS1. If you don't know anything about the PS1 is actually a console that it varied from region to region. So if you played a PS1, let's say in Europe, their TVs actually ran at a different refresh rate. It actually only ran at 50 hertz, whereas NTSC or American Standard TVs back in the day ran at 60 hertz. So when you try to play these PAL games on the North American PS1 Classic, you're going to be getting lag because they weren't designed around RTV. So it's going to be 50 hertz instead of 60 hertz. Now, it's not all games on the PS1 Classic that does this. It's only about 9 of the games, I do believe, or so, that are PAL region games, and the rest of them are actually NTSC games. So they will play perfectly fine on the TV, and they should have minimal lag. But for the rest of the games that are PAL games being put on the NTSC version of the PS1 Classic is just absolutely ridiculous and stupid on Sony's part. It really does feel like what Sony is doing here is they're pretty much just being super lazy. They're pretty much trying to do what Nintendo's doing with the NES Classic and the SNES Classic, but they're pretty much messing this whole thing up. We've already had problems with the PS1 Classic, UI being bad, the games list not being all that great, and now we find out Sony's actually doing this. Why are they actually putting PAL games on a North American or an NTSC version of the PS1 Classic? It's like a slap in the face. It's like we've already heard about all these different problems the PS1 Classic has, and then you tell me Sony's going to take all these games from the PAL region, whether it be the UK, and try to put these on the North American or NTSC version of the PS1 Classic. And honestly, I don't even understand why Sony is actually doing this with the PS1 Classic. Is it not like they couldn't get their own games for this region on the PS1 Classic for America? It just really doesn't make sense all that well. I'm still trying to comprehend this thing. I'm still trying to wrap my head around this whole situation because that really doesn't seem right. The only reason I can see them doing that is maybe because it's cheaper. But then again, I wouldn't be too surprised if they had these games just laying around, and while they were going to port some of these PAL games over to the European version of the PS1 Classic, they just said, well, let's get a little bit lazy. We're already half-fasting this thing anyway. We have a bad UI. We're gonna leave out some games that are pretty much necessary on this thing, like Crash and Spyro. Let's leave those out as well. But since we already are uploading all the games to the PAL version of PS1 Classic, let's just take some of those games and put them on the PS1 American version of the PS1 Classic. Nobody's really gonna find out about this, but we all know it's the internet, and we all know there's people around there that like tinkering and doing stuff on the internet. So you really thought that no one's actually gonna find out that you're putting PAL version games on the NTSC American version of the PS1 Classic? Come on, we're eventually gonna find out about this, and people are gonna be very mad about this. What we have is even a worse situation than I thought, and honestly, at $100, I just don't think this thing is very good at all. We're missing games. The UI sucks. We don't have any UI features. We only have one game save slot per game. Overall, this thing is not looking all that hot, and honestly, I just really can't recommend this thing at $100. Sure, when you get this thing for $100, it's not really going to be all that bad, but then again, you do have to realize there are other options like the SNES Classic, which is only $80. Heck, you can even go ahead and get the NES Classic. The NES Classic is only going to run you $60. So you can buy one of those, and I think your money's well spent. You're getting a better UI. You're just getting games that actually aren't too laggy on those systems at all, and this thing just doesn't seem all that great. And it really does suck that what Sony did here is pretty much just cheap out, and overall it just doesn't really seem like a good thing to get. So it pretty much sucks that Sony is pretty much half-assing their own product. But anyway, guys, this is Wayne from My Tech News signing out. Boop.